The Orion's Fury glided through the stars, its dark hull reflecting the light of distant suns. It was a ship like no other, imposing, powerful, and at the very forefront of advanced technology. Commanded by the Varash, an ancient and highly intelligent alien species, it had been on a mission to suppress a rogue faction that had been spreading chaos across the galaxy. But now the ship was crippled. A sudden explosion had rocked the engines, and the entire starship was in jeopardy. As systems began to fail, alarms blared across the bridge, and crew members scrambled to assess the damage. Despite their advanced technology, the Varash were struggling. Their immense intellects, sharpened by millennia of evolution, could not make up for the severity of the damage they faced. They needed help. Help they could not get from their allies in time. They had no choice but to reach out to the one species they had never considered a worthy ally: humanity. "Send the signal, Veran," the queen of the Varash ordered coldly. Her eyes, usually sharp and filled with the fire of leadership, now held an edge of something closer to desperation. The vastness of space and the vast power of the Varash had failed them. They needed outside help. The signal they sent out across the galaxy was a long shot, a plea for assistance, one that was more of a gamble than a strategy. They had heard of humans, of course, primitive, small, and scattered across distant worlds, but they had always viewed them as beneath notice. Yet, as the situation grew direr, they needed someone with expertise in ship mechanics. It wasn't something they had expected to rely on, but now it was their only hope. As the signal pulsed through space, the crew braced for whatever would come next. It wasn't long before a ship responded, a small human vessel named the Stray that had been drifting just outside their reach. It was an old model, its appearance nothing like the sleek, impressive ships of the Varash. Yet, it was this very vessel that answered their call. When the small human craft docked with the Orion's Fury, the crew stood in stunned silence. The hatch opened with a hiss, and from the shadows emerged a single human. His name was Liam Blackstone, a former ship mechanic from Earth. As he stepped into the enormous docking bay of the Orion's Fury, the Varash crew gawked at him. Liam was nothing like the warriors or scholars the Varash were accustomed to. He was average height, with short dark hair and a face weathered by years of hard work. He wore simple clothes, far removed from the armor or regal attire of the Varash. His eyes, however, were bright and determined. He exuded a quiet confidence, the kind born of experience and resolve, but nothing about him screamed power or greatness, at least not to the Varash. As the crew continued to watch, Veran stood from her throne, her regal form towering over the others. There was a flicker of skepticism in her eyes, though it was quickly masked by the stoic demeanor she had perfected over centuries. Her words, when they came, were sharp and filled with authority.
"You are the one who responded to our signal?" she asked, her voice carrying across the cavernous room.
"I'm the one who can fix your ship," he said simply. His voice was calm, unshaken by the hundreds of alien eyes now fixed upon him. The Varash stared at him, their alien features betraying no emotion, yet the doubt was palpable. In all their vast experience and intelligence, they had never considered that a human might be capable of fixing what they had failed to. And now, here he was, standing before them, claiming to be their only hope. "You will need to prove yourself," Veran said, her gaze never leaving him. She had made her assessment quickly, as she always did. The Varash did not make mistakes, and she was determined not to be proven wrong by a mere human. "Show us your abilities," she ordered. Liam didn't hesitate. With a swift motion, he turned and began walking toward the ship's maintenance access. The Varash engineers, who had been unable to fix the ship's power systems, followed at a distance, unsure what to expect from someone so unfamiliar with their technology. Liam worked in silence, his hands moving with practiced precision. His eyes scanned the engine's diagnostics quickly, taking in every piece of information. He identified the cause of the malfunction almost immediately. The Varash engineers watched, unsure whether to be impressed or annoyed that a human could assess their ship so effortlessly. Within minutes, Liam had repaired one of the main circuits. He stepped back, wiping his hands on his pants. The system hummed to life, its lights flickering back on as the engines began to recover. The Varash engineers exchanged glances, their surprise evident. "What is this?" one of them finally asked, his voice thick with disbelief. Liam looked up, shrugging slightly.
"It's called improvisation, something you might have missed," he said with a grin.
"It's not all about fancy tech and theory. Sometimes you have to get your hands dirty."
As Liam continued working, it became clear that his expertise went far beyond what any of the Varash had anticipated. His knowledge of mechanics was not just functional, it was intuitive.
He wasn't just fixing the Orion's fury, he was improving it, fine-tuning systems that had long been neglected. He adapted quickly to the alien technology, using tools and equipment he had never seen before. His hands moved with skill, and the Orion's fury came back to life under his guidance. On the bridge, Veron stood in silence, her eyes narrowing as she observed the progress. She had hoped the human would fail. She had prepared herself for that, for disappointment and frustration. But instead, she felt a growing sense of unease as the ship, once on the brink of disaster, began to hum with new energy. The human, this small, insignificant creature by their standards, was doing what the greatest Varash engineers had failed to do.
In the span of just a few hours, Liam Blackstone had proved himself in a way no one had expected.
He was more than just a mechanic from a primitive world. He was a problem solver, a master of adaptation, and an expert in ingenuity. But to Veron, this was still an anomaly, an unsettling one. For the first time, she felt the faintest seed of doubt begin to grow within her. Was it possible that humans were more than what the Varash had believed? The queen of the Varash, revered and unyielding, could not yet accept the implications of the answer. The Orion's fury was quiet now, much quieter than it had been before. The steady hum of the engines had returned, but this time, it wasn't the usual sound of a well-oiled machine. It felt different, stronger, more alive. It was the sound of a ship that had been brought back from the edge of collapse by an outsider. A human, no less. Liam stood in the center of the engineering bay, wiping his hands on a rag. Sweat beaded on his forehead, his face expressionless despite the hours of work. He had spent most of the day with his hands, deep in the guts of the starship, fixing what the Varash engineers couldn't. Now, as the last of the diagnostics came through clean, he leaned against the bulkhead and crossed his arms, surveying the work he'd done. Around him, the Varash engineers were still processing the repairs. They moved in their usual deliberate way, but their eyes kept flicking toward him, the human, the one who had fixed their ship. There was no hiding the mixture of disbelief and awe on their faces.
"How did you do it?" one of the engineers finally asked. His tone was flat, as though he was merely trying to understand the impossibility of the situation.
Liam shrugged casually.
"I used what I had, just like any mechanic would."
You have the best tools and technology, but without knowing how to use them, they're just fancy decorations. He didn't make eye contact. Instead, he continued to inspect the work as if his words didn't matter. He didn't feel the need to explain himself, not anymore. But the question lingered in the room, hanging heavy in the air like the smoke of a distant fire. How had a human, someone from a planet so far behind the Varash in technological development, managed to fix a starship? The Varash had built ships that could sail the stars, that could travel across galaxies in the blink of an eye. Their technology was unparalleled in the galaxy. Yet, here was this human, standing among them, having repaired what they could not. And now, they were left to wonder, was this a fluke? Or was there something to this human that they hadn't considered?
As the day wore on, the engineers continued their work.
Their doubts were still palpable, but they didn't dare challenge him directly. They could see the results. The Orion's fury was functioning again, and the damage that had seemed irreparable was slowly being reversed. The only thing that remained was to test the ship in real combat. It was a battle the Varash were ready for. The rogue faction that had attacked them was still out there, and they weren't far off. If the repairs held up, they would be able to retaliate with full force. If not, the Varash could be at risk of another devastating defeat. Meanwhile, Varan watched from her throne on the bridge. She had stayed silent for the most part, observing Liam's work from a distance. The human had fixed their ship. There was no denying it. But there was something gnawing at her, a feeling she couldn't shake. She had watched him carefully, taking note of his every move, his every decision. There was something more to this human than he let on. He wasn't just a mechanic. He was a survivor. The Queen of the Varash had lived for centuries, seen countless battles, and dealt with enemies both inside and outside her empire. But this human, this small, insignificant creature, was different. He had faced a shipwreck in space, and rather than panic or shrink from the danger, he had stepped forward, taking charge and fixing what others had given up on. What was it about him that set him apart? Her thoughts were interrupted by the soft chime of the communications panel. She straightened, her sharp eyes narrowing as she turned to the screen. The face that appeared was that of one of her top commanders, Commander Talak. He was grim, his face lined with concern. "Queen Varan," he said, his voice tense. "The rogue faction is making its move. They've entered the outer rim of our territory, and their ships are closing in fast."
We have no time to waste.
Varan's eyes narrowed, her mind already calculating the next move. "Prepare the fleet," she ordered, her voice cold and commanding. "We will strike them before they have a chance to regroup." She turned away from the screen, her gaze falling on Liam, who had been observing the entire exchange in silence. The crew, as always, was ready for war, but Liam was different. He wasn't like them. He wasn't a soldier, a commander, or a strategist. He was a mechanic. Yet somehow, the ship was in better shape than it had been when they first arrived. His repairs had given the Orion's fury an edge that no one could have predicted. "Your work has been invaluable," Varan said, her voice quieter now, though there was no warmth to it. "But this is not a place for civilians. This is war. You are not one of us." Liam met her gaze, unfazed. "I'm not a soldier, but I've seen enough battles to know that a ship is only as good as the people who maintain it. And right now, you need someone who knows how to keep things running." Varan studied him, trying to read his intentions.
He had a point, but she wasn't ready to admit it.
Not yet. As the crew of the Orion's Fury prepared for battle, Varan assigned Liam a position in the engineering bay.
He wasn't to be on the front lines, but his role in keeping the ship functional was undeniable, and if something went wrong during the fight, she would need him. The battle was coming, and it was clear now that Liam had become an unexpected ally to the Varash, whether they liked it or not. The Queen couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in the pit of her stomach, the one that told her this human might change everything. But there was no time for second-guessing. The rogue faction was closing in, and war was upon them. The Orion's Fury launched from its docking bay, its engines roaring to life, the hum of power resonating through every inch of the ship. Liam stood in the engineering bay, watching as the stars rushed past the viewport. The ship was alive again, thanks to him. But the real test was just beginning. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not ever. The battle was coming. The Orion's Fury had dropped out of hyperspace just as the rogue faction's ships appeared on the radar. The tension in the ship's control room was palpable. Crew members moved quickly, working to get the weapon systems online while the Varash commanders prepared their strategies. But even with their vast experience and advanced technology, the rogue faction had caught them by surprise, and the Orion's Fury was still recovering from the damage they had taken. Varan stood at the front of the control room, her gaze fixed on the tactical displays. Her every instinct told her to strike hard and fast, but something didn't sit right with her. The human had done the impossible by fixing the ship, but was it enough to guarantee victory? They needed every advantage they could get, and right now, Liam Blackstone had proven to be an unexpected asset. Humans had always been a secondary species in her eyes, fragile, weak, and insignificant. Yet here was one, standing among her crew, helping them prepare for war. She couldn't deny it. They had no choice but to trust him. The tactical officer, General Thrix, looked up from his station.
"Your orders, Your Majesty?"
Veron snapped her gaze toward him.
"We'll engage them head-on, but I want our best engineers standing by in case something goes wrong with the ship's systems. Have Blackstone standing by in the engineering bay."
Thrix nodded, though there was an unspoken question in his eyes. He had his doubts about the human just like the others, but his orders were clear, and the battle had already begun. Liam was already back in the engineering bay, making sure that every system was functioning as it should. His hands moved quickly across the panels, running diagnostic checks and ensuring that all the power systems were online. Despite the gravity of the situation, he remained calm. He wasn't a soldier or a warrior, but he was a mechanic, and in that moment, that was all that mattered. Outside, the Orion's Fury fired its first volley of laser blasts at the approaching enemy ships. The rogue faction's fleet responded immediately, their ships lighting up with aggressive maneuvers. The first few rounds struck their targets, but the Orion's Fury was still vulnerable. Its repairs had been extensive, but not without their flaws. If anything went wrong, they would be sitting ducks. Liam's mind raced as he ran through the systems. He knew this wasn't the time to second-guess himself. He had to trust his instincts and his experience. The ship's pulse engines were stable for now, but if the battle went on for too long, there was a chance they could overheat, and if that happened, the Orion's Fury would be in serious trouble.
"Come on, baby,"
Liam muttered to himself, tapping the console in front of him.
"Hold it together!" Back on the bridge, Viron's eyes never left the tactical displays. Her mind was calculating the next move, but she knew this battle wasn't going to be won by firepower alone. It was going to come down to strategy, and whether or not the crew could adapt quickly enough. She was about to give another order when the ship rocked violently, throwing everyone off balance. The Orion's Fury had taken a direct hit, and alarms began to blare across the bridge. "Damage report!"
Viron barked, her voice cutting through the chaos. The tactical officer Thrix was the first to respond. "Shields are holding, but our outer hull is compromised."
"We've taken hits to the aft and port side. Engines are stable, but if they keep targeting our weak spots, we'll be in trouble."
Viron's eyes narrowed as she processed the information. It was clear now that this wasn't going to be a straightforward battle. The rogue faction was smarter than they had given credit for. "Redirect power to the aft shields," she ordered.
"Fire back with everything we've got. Full energy to the laser cannons."
The Orion's Fury shook again, this time more violently. One of the crew members in the control room shouted an alarm as another blast hit the ship, sending sparks flying from the wall. Viron's focus remained steady, though her fingers gripped the armrests of her throne tightly.
"Liam!"
she barked over the comms.
"Port, can you stabilize the power systems?"
Liam's voice came through, calm as always.
"I've got it covered. Just focus on the fight."
"I'll keep the ship running."
Viron hesitated for a moment, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. For all his flaws, for all his differences, Liam was the one thing keeping the ship from falling apart. She didn't like the thought of relying on him, but there was no denying that he was proving invaluable. With a deep breath, she turned back to the controls.
"Full power to the front shields.
Give them no room to breathe. We push forward."
Outside, the battle raged on. The rogue faction's ships were sleek and fast, but they lacked the firepower of the Orion's Fury. However, their tactics were far more advanced. The Varash had underestimated them, and now they were paying the price. Every time the Orion's fury struck, the enemy responded with swift counterattacks. Liam was in the heart of the ship, his hands moving like a blur across the consoles. He knew that if anything went wrong, if the engines failed or the power systems went down again, the Varash would be sitting ducks. The power cores were fluctuating. There was a sudden drop in energy to one of the systems.
No, 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 he muttered. He quickly rerouted the energy to stabilize the power grid, but the drain was becoming too much.
The ship's systems were strained under the intensity of the battle. Veron!
Liam shouted through the comms.
We need more power diverted to the engines. If we can't outmaneuver them, this fight is lost. Divert the power. Make it happen.
Liam's fingers flew over the panel as he began adjusting the settings. The Orion's fury shuddered once more as he redirected the energy. The engines roared to life, and the ship surged forward, its massive hull slicing through space like a blade. But it wasn't enough. The enemy ships were faster, more agile, and their weapons were deadly accurate. One of their ships darted in close, launching a barrage of missiles directly at the Orion's fury. The missiles hit their mark, blasting the outer hull with a deafening explosion. The bridge crew staggered, gripping their stations to stay balanced.
Hull integrity at 60%, shouted the communications officer.
Power to the aft shields,
Veron ordered. But it was too late. Another hit struck, this time directly to the engine bay. Sparks flew, and the Orion's fury lurched violently, throwing everyone forward. Liam's voice came through again, steady as ever.
We're losing power to the aft engines.
I'm working on it, but you need to give me more time.
Veron clenched her fists in frustration. She could feel the walls closing in. If they didn't change their approach, they were going to lose. The rogue faction's ships circled them like predators, waiting for the right moment to deliver the killing blow. The situation was dire, but for the first time in the battle, Veron allowed herself a moment of reflection. It was the human, Liam Blackstone, who had kept them from total destruction. He wasn't a soldier, but he was fighting in his own way. She had underestimated him before, and now, as the battle raged on, she realized she had no choice but to rely on him. The Orion's fury was still standing, but it wouldn't be for long unless they could turn the tide. And right now, Liam was their best shot. The Orion's fury was on the edge. The ship had been battered, its hull scarred from the relentless barrage of missiles and energy blasts. Its engines, though repaired, had been pushed beyond their limits, and the strain was showing. Sparks flew from the lower decks, and alarms blared throughout the ship. Yet it remained alive, hanging on by a thread. Veron stood at the front of the control room, her eyes scanning the battlefield outside. The rogue faction's fleet had split into two groups, circling their prey like sharks. They knew they had the Varash on the ropes, but they weren't expecting a fight like this. Despite their tactical advantage, the Orion's fury had shown resilience they hadn't anticipated. "Damage report," Veron commanded, her voice cutting through the tension in the room.
Outer hull integrity at 40%, came the voice of the communications officer. Engines holding, but barely.
Power drain on the aft section continues. Shields are weakening. Veron clenched her fists. They needed more time. She could feel the weight of her people's survival pressing down on her. If they didn't win this battle, the Orion's fury would be lost, and the rogue faction would sweep through the Varish defenses with ease. The battle outside raged on, but Veron's mind wasn't solely on the fight. She was thinking about Liam, the human who had come aboard her ship and turned the tide. He wasn't a soldier, but in that moment, he had proven to be more than just a mechanic. He had kept their ship running, kept the Orion's fury from falling apart. The repair work he had done had given them the edge they needed. He had kept her people alive. But now, in the midst of battle, she had to make a choice. She had no time to question it anymore. Liam was part of this crew now. There was no turning back. She needed him, Liam Veron shouted through the comms. her voice sharper than before.
"We need everything you've got. The ship can't take much more." "I'm on it," came Liam's calm voice in return.
Liam was back in the engineering bay, his hands flying over the control panels as he adjusted the systems. Sweat dripped from his brow, and his muscles ached from hours of relentless work. The ship was falling apart around him, but he refused to give in to the pressure. His mind was focused. The Varosh may have underestimated him, but he had been a mechanic long enough to know how to save a sinking ship. Literally. He tapped a few keys and accessed the power grid, rerouting energy to the failing engines. He knew they were running on borrowed time. The Orion's Fury was more than just a ship now. It was a symbol of the Varosh's strength and of the fragile alliance that had formed between them and a human mechanic. He couldn't let them fail now, not after everything they'd been through. Liam's fingers danced across the console, adjusting and tweaking the settings. He wasn't just fixing the ship's power grid. He was adjusting the very heart of it. He was keeping the energy flowing, making sure they had the firepower to fight back. Outside, the rogue faction's ships were closing in, their guns trained on the Orion's Fury. But as the energy from the Orion's Fury surged forward, the ship's weapon systems powered up, and the energy shields flared to life once more. The ship wasn't finished yet. It wasn't over. Varen's eyes widened as the sensors registered the change. The rogue faction's ships were within range.
"Fire!" she ordered. "Wallendo!"
The Orion's Fury responded. Its weapon systems came alive, sending volley after volley of laser fire toward the enemy ships. The rogue faction returned fire, but the Orion's Fury was no longer the weak, crippled vessel it had been earlier. It was back at full strength, its power restored by the hands of a human mechanic who had refused to let it die. The enemy fleet faltered under the barrage. The Orion's Fury struck one of the smaller ships directly, its shields collapsing and the vessel exploding in a brilliant flash of light. The rogue faction was beginning to feel the weight of their overconfidence. They had underestimated the Varosh, and now they were paying the price. Varon's heart raced. They were winning, but the battle wasn't over yet. There was still too much at stake. If they could finish off the rogue faction's flagship, they could end this battle once and for all.
"Target the flagship!" Varon ordered. "All weapons focus fire!"
Liam's voice came through the comms.
"I'm working on it. The power grid's holding, but we need more stability. I'm working on it."
I'll make the final
adjustments. Varon didn't hesitate. "You've got it. Do it now." With a final burst of energy, the Orion's Fury fired its most powerful weapon, a concentrated beam of energy aimed directly at the flagship. The blast struck with pinpoint accuracy, piercing through the enemy's shields and into the heart of their ship. The rogue flagship erupted in a massive explosion, sending debris flying in all directions. The remaining ships of the rogue faction hesitated. They had lost their leader. They had lost their advantage. The Orion's Fury wasn't a broken ship anymore. It was a force to be reckoned with. Varon turned to face the tactical officer. "Status?"
The officer's voice shook as he spoke. "The enemy fleet is retreating, Your Majesty."
"We've won."
The bridge erupted in a chorus of cheers, but Varon stood silently. Her eyes were focused on the tactical display, watching as the enemy ships scattered into the distance. It was over. The Orion's Fury had survived, and they had survived because of one human. Liam had done it. He had kept the ship alive, kept her people alive. Without him, they would have lost. The battle had proven something Varon had been unwilling to admit before. Humans weren't just weak, primitive creatures. They had the ability to think, to adapt, to fight in ways that even the most advanced alien species might overlook.
"Liam," Varon said quietly, the words feeling heavy in her throat. "Yes, Your Majesty," came the calm response.
"You have done more than I could have ever expected." The Varash owe you a debt.
Liam didn't reply at first, but when he did, his voice was filled with quiet resolve.
I'm just doing my job.
Varan nodded, a small, almost imperceptible smile pulling at the corner of her lips.
Perhaps. But you've earned more than that today.
She turned away from the communications panel, her mind already moving forward. The battle was won, but the war was far from over. There would be more challenges ahead, more enemies to face. But for now, for this moment, they had prevailed. And for the first time, Baravan found herself acknowledging something she had never thought possible. The human mechanic had earned a place among the Varash. Perhaps, just perhaps, they were not so different after all.